All right, all right. Welcome to another lunchtime chat. Today I think is a special one, and I think it's special because it speaks to the complexities that are associated with being American. Um, we are a group that's origin is very unique and different, especially because it is attached to the formation of a country. So today's lunchtime chat is titled Black, White, and Gray, uh, American uh, Family. I'm losing track of my thoughts. I'm sorry, and please forgive me for that because I don't have my notes right there. So let me see if I can find it and say it correctly to you guys. There we go. Black, White, and Gray, American Family Histories and Race. So we're going to be talking about how that original intersection of things occurred. You know, now we're at a point in our existence where we're often talking about intersectionality and all of this other stuff. But at one point in like the 15th century, there was this establishment of race being a divider, being a thing that made it understood that this group of people was to be subject to this type of treatment and to be more encouraged to be subservient and enslaved. Uh, but that doesn't stop things from occurring under those circumstances that lead to offspring, that lead to relationships that are not the ones that we generally talk about in the context in which we'll talk about today. So none of this is to be dismissive or to leave out the fact that, yes, there was wholesale mistreatment of a people, uh, sexualization, rape, all of these things occurred, incest. These things occurred in a horrific way that we are not dismissive of, that we are very acknowledging of. But what Karen is going to present today is going to be associated with some of what came after those extreme dynamics, and is still attached in the shadow of them. So I wanted to make that announcement. This is not to romanticize anything. We're clear on that. This is with a clear eye view of the complexities associated with living in high proximity to one another over many, many, many generations. So I wanted to begin the day with a quote before I introduce Karen. And this quote is actually from Frederick Douglass. And this is in the shadow of the Civil War. I had the opportunity, and I'm gracious for it, to go and do some research at Yale where his papers are kept. And this was one that really caught my eye. So the American people are essentially of the same race. They are the same color, united by blood, by a common origin, by a common language, by a common literature, by a common glory, and by the same grand historic associations and achievements. So at that point in time, just to give a little context, he's talking about the reconciliation that's about to occur in the shadow of the Civil War, but he's trying to make it understood that we are sharing in some commonality associated with what it is to be American, despite the circumstances that dictated that. So keeping all of that in mind, understanding that we still have yet to understand that collectively speaking, we are unique. That melting pot analogy does apply to a degree. There's a little bit of complexity with that statement as well. People kind of don't understand that it's about a little bit more than just all of these different cultures and things melting together. It's about some other things in terms of becoming a unique thing. And that's kind of what Frederick Douglass is talking about. So I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to allow for Miss Skelton to do what she came to do, which is make a presentation to you all that I think will be awesome and unique, and should be informative and edifying, which is always the goal here with what we do at RELC, especially with these lunchtime chats. So without further ado, Miss Karen Skelton is going to present today, and it's Black, White, and Gray, American Family, Histories, and Race. Let's welcome Miss Karen Skelton.
All right, thank you. Excellent. Thank you for tech is wonderful and I love it. I love the opportunity to be able to share this with you, but just getting those things up and running takes a moment. So um, I'm still excited to be able to have this opportunity to share this information with you all about American family histories and race. I work in the field of reparative genealogy, and that means nonstop learning, especially in areas of social history, politics, and the law. And everything I encounter has a connection to our current world. So we can learn so much about ourselves and our society if we see that the past is not just in the past, but it absolutely informs how and why things are what they are today. And this leads to a deeper understanding and hopefully better judgment and decision making than we make in our world. So my hope is that at the end of this hour, you will have a better appreciation for all the things family research can offer besides making a pedigree chart of names and dates to hang on a wall. Come on. Okay, everything was working great. And now my clicker is not clicking to the next slide. 1 second. Oh, man.
Karen, we've all been there.
I just, I worked it and it was working beautifully. And I don't know why it's doing this. All right, I might just have to do it manually. I have my little laser pointer and everything.
You got
Okay,
it.
here's a
It
quick,
clicked over. Yeah, it clicked over. We see it.
yeah, I'm
Mhm.
having to do it manually. Um, so here's a quick view of the road map that we'll be following for today. We're going to travel through the following time and places. We're going to look at 5 examples of mixed race families in Virginia and North Carolina, from the famous to the ordinary, and from the 1700s to the present day. Now, it's important to know the laws that bound people at any given point in our nation's history. That goes for written and unwritten laws, social customs, attitudes. So throughout this, we're going to examine the role of genealogy to uncover long hidden truths that put Black and Native Americans more fully in the narrative and allow us to tell a richer and more accurate story. All right, so if everybody's ready, we're going to go and we're going to start with a case that you all should at least have some familiarity with, and that is Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. I really want my clicker to work. All right, in broad strokes, Thomas Jefferson married Martha Wales. She was the daughter of John and Martha Epps Wales. All right, so here's Martha Wales. Here's her parents, John and Martha Epps Wales. So you can see here at top left that John's wife, Martha, was his lawful wife. That meant she had all the legal rights that position endowed. But she died young, just 3 weeks after the birth of her only surviving child, Martha. John Wales remarried 2 more times, but lost both wives at an early age. So that surviving daughter, Martha, married Thomas Jefferson in 1772. Theirs was a happy marriage, but Martha's health was not great. She was frail and spent each year either pregnant or nursing or grieving the death of yet another child. She died 4 months after the birth of her last daughter, having never fully recovered after labor and delivery. And now, because she had endured 2 loveless stepmothers as a girl, she asked Thomas to please not remarry so that their children would not have to risk the same. And he agreed. All right, so now let's introduce the Hemming side of the family. Back up here to John Wales. He had a second family with a mulatto woman who had grown up on his estate. She was Elizabeth Hemmings, and she bore 8 children with the widower, John Wales, who did not have children by his second 2 wives. Since Elizabeth herself was half white, her children with John Wales were 3/4 white, which at that time was called a quadroon, meaning one of 4 grandparents was Black. So despite having 3 of 4 grandparents who were white, the laws of the land were such that the children followed the condition of the mother into bondage. When John Wales died, who inherited the entire estate? His only surviving daughter, Martha, and by extension, her husband, Thomas Jefferson. So here comes a whole extended family of enslaved people to go live at Monticello, including little Sally Hemings, a paternal half-sister of Martha. During Jefferson's lifetime, it was an open secret that he had a relationship with a concubine named Sally that produced several children. And I also want to make sure to be clear, I will be using terminology that was used in records during the time. I'm sure you all are aware of that. The reason for doing that, this is not to be using it as we do currently, in derogatory intention, but simply going with what's in the historical record. So it was known that he had a relationship with Sally Hemings, who was referred to as his concubine. But let's unpack that a little bit. I love this quote. This was a lot more common than people thought. So for a very long time in our history, affluent white men made all the rules, right? From the highest levels of government down to their farms and their households. And they were also notorious for breaking them. Regarding sex across the color line, there were plenty of rules in place to prevent it, but the truth was interracial relations were commonplace in all levels of class and caste. And when it comes to the upper crust, notably Southern men, their actions belied the image that they tried to project of their great virtue. So because of how widespread was the habit of sex across the color line in all its many forms, unspoken rules prevailed over the ones on the books. And when someone was brought up on charges for, say, cohabitation, the local lawyers and judges might have been reluctant to prosecute, knowing that it could lead to widespread exposure of any number of local men. So, in fact, as early as 1853, the Virginia legislature debated establishing a one-drop rule, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But they voted against it back then when it was acknowledged that this was a poorly kept secret. How many generations of interracial relationships could put each and every one of them at risk of being impacted by that one-drop rule? So they did not pass it in 1853. It comes later. So the social mores of the time and the day was, as long as couples didn't flaunt their relationship publicly, people turned a blind eye to it. And if and when it was challenged, such as being taken to court, it more often is not stemmed from some other underlying motive. The most common one being financial. And that would be things like anger and envy about free people of color becoming successful and having obvious signs of wealth. Right? Those were common reasons for others to make accusations about their immoral cohabitation. Now, an exception here, though, was Thomas Jefferson. Obviously, one of the most well-known people in the country at his time.
Karen,
His
I'm not sure if it's
exposure.
just me, but your audio dropped out a little bit a couple times.
Oh,
It might
goodness.
be, yeah, it's fine. It comes back, but I just wanted to make you aware. It might need to be closer to the mic or something. I'm not sure.
Oh, okay. All right. If it happens again, please let me know. Okay. So there was a newspaper man named James Callender. He's the one who publicly exposed Thomas Jefferson for his relationship with Sally Hemings. But he did so because he felt that Jefferson disrespected him after winning election to the office of presidency. He wanted a patronage job, and he was sore that he didn't get it. And so he wanted to embarrass Jefferson in it, slander him, whatever, in anything that he could. So it was for a personal slight that he used his role as a newspaper man to drag Jefferson's reputation through the mud. So there's a historian who I like regarding all this topic, Joshua Rothman. And he wrote about this. And he said, for Jefferson to acknowledge openly that he had two families sharing Monticello and to have them treated equally would have been intolerable, both a violation of the unwritten code governing slave master relations in the South and an affront to the sensibilities of his white family as the only legitimate one. My translation, the first rule of White Club is don't talk about White Club. In Jefferson's case, though, he didn't talk about it and he didn't write about it. Then the short-lived scandal blew over. So as it faded over time, that open secret of his day turned into the closed secret of the next 150 years. And it was only in the 1990s that new scholarship and new technologies like genetics finally brought it out into the open. We're going to leave that part for right now so we can stay on our roadmap in the same time and place as Jefferson and look at an example of a non-famous ordinary man, and that is Edward Moore of Fredericksburg, Virginia. So unlike Jefferson, Edward Moore was a new arrival to the colony, and he set himself up as a trade merchant. He married a young woman from a well-regarded family, Helen McDonald, and that was crucial for him as a new arrival without his own family connections to support his prospects. Edward and Helen had three daughters, Jane and Anne and Rose. And he kept a business presence in the town of Fredericksburg, a port trading town, and he had a 400-acre estate across the river in Stafford County. And chances are high that he had a second family on that estate, a young mulatto woman named Dinah, with whom he likely fathered three more daughters, Fanny, Evelina, and Maria. Edward had about 35 enslaved people on his farm property. But he wrote a will, and in it he specified that he would manumit upon his death the mulatto woman Dinah and the three bright mulatto, light-skinned girls, Fanny, Evelina, and Maria. They were the only ones that he manumitted. Those three daughters all married in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and had children of their own. I'm going to point out just one right now, which we'll look at in a minute, and that is Maria's daughter, Fannie Mae Richards. All right, but before we do that, I want to show you one of the registrations that these women all had to make at the courthouse, because I think it's way cool to see original documents whenever you can. Now, nearly all states, including the northern ones, had laws to regulate free people of color. In Virginia, they were required to register once a year in the cities and once every 3 years in the counties. And the intent of this law was to restrain the practice of Negroes going at large. In other words, they wanted to monitor their movements and make sure runaways were not coming to town pretending to be freed people. And these registrations tell us if the individual was born free or was manumitted, and if so, by whom. And so this one clearly tells us that Evelina Young was emancipated by Edward Moore. So she's registering every year in that office. And Edward Moore died in 1806. And so these girls had a lot more time in their lives as free people, right, than as enslaved. So this all doesn't seem too onerous, right, that they have to do this. And the families actually were doing quite well, even owning their own homes in the city of Fredericksburg. That went on for a couple of decades. But then what happened? The Nat Turner Rebellion of 1831. That's what happened. It was an attempted revolt by a slave who happened to be literate and was a devout preacher. And so even though the revolt failed quickly, slaveholders across the region were scared out of their minds that these uprisings would continue. So the General Assembly made new laws that barred Black Virginians from preaching. They put tighter restrictions on the ability of slaves to gather or peaceably assemble. They barred them from owning guns. And they beefed up the law that said, if you're freed, you need to petition the General Assembly for permission to stay or else leave the state or risk re-enslavement. And that law actually gave sheriffs the authority to sell free people of color at auction. So a lot of the free people headed north to Chicago and Detroit in the 1830s and 1840s. And that includes most of Dinah's children and grandchildren. So now let's meet one of them. This is Fannie Mae Richards. She was one of 14 children born to Maria Moore and Adolphus Richards. Maria's husband, Adolphus, was a mixed race free man who had immigrated from Curacao in the Caribbean islands to Virginia. This couple was very committed to making sure all their children received a sound education. And Fannie then went on to teach generations of children, and she fought to desegregate schools in Detroit. And she succeeded at doing so 90 years before the Supreme Court case, Brown versus Board of Education, that affected schools all across the nation. And this large family was also active in the Underground Railroad, because Detroit is the last stop just before you cross the river into Canada. And I think this photograph is a great example of the title Skelton chose for this talk on American families in Black, white, and gray. You're going to see a lot of this, the shades of gray all the way throughout. Here's another one. Please meet the Reverend William Henry Stevens of Caroline County, Virginia. Now, there is no proof that he was the biological son of his enslaver, Williams Carter, but there are clues. not only his distinctly biracial appearance, but his ability to become a literate preacher in the years after the Nat Turner Rebellion in Virginia, right? It became illegal to learn to read or write, or even to preach to a group of Black people, slave or free. Young William Henry Stevens attended the white Concord Baptist Church regularly with his enslaver, William Carter, and he learned to read. And in his enslaved community, I have found records that describe how he would lead the singing and the shouting on Sunday afternoons at the quarters, the slave cabins. And they called it that because, remember, they're not allowed to preach. So they would gather for the singing and the shouting. And so he was already doing this during the time of slavery. And then after the war, he and some fellow local freedmen wasted no time in establishing a church of their own. Now, most of his 8 adult children moved to upstate New York and became pillars of the Black community, primarily around Rochester. Others went to New York City, Long Island, and one from there, a great-great-grandson, moved back to Caroline County in his 40s and became a pastor of that same church, founded by his ancestor, William Henry Stevens. He, the current pastor, he knew the church had great significance to his family in that community, but he did not know he was a direct descendant at that time, because the ones who moved north tend to leave the past behind. He knows now. All right, I can also make a tie from William Henry Stevens of Caroline County, Virginia, to the local family, a family from Winston-Salem that some of you all might know. So William Henry Stevens' eldest great-granddaughter, Louise, she studied to become a teacher, and then she went to the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. And while working there, she met and married Russell Atkins, who was the head of the agriculture department. This is Russell here. And Russell had a big advantage when it came to climbing the education ladder. He was the eldest son of 2 prominent educators, Simon and Aliana Atkins. Dr. Simon Green Atkins was founder and first head of Slater Industrial Academy, which became Winston-Salem State University. He was also a founding member of the North Carolina Negro Teachers Association. And Aliana was also a teacher. And the 2 of them were absolutely tireless in their actions to improve living standards for Black North Carolinians, not just in education, but in improving the conditions of neighborhoods and encouraging home ownership. And they founded Slater Hospital, the first for Black residents in the area of Winston-Salem. So again, one thing you may notice here is a distinctly mixed race family. And I have found a consistent pattern of mulatto marrying mulatto, as they were called back then. Remember William Henry. And the Stevens and the Atkins families fit that description. They also fit a pattern of mixed race individuals pursuing higher education and entering into medicine, the law, politics, and of course, education. And I wonder if somehow they served as a transition or a bridge across the color line, because you find this a lot. Okay. Time to meet the last family today and come even closer into our local area and to see how laws impacted mixed race families over time. John Dungy. He is a center point in a family that has significant ties to Guilford County. His father and grandfather had come down from Virginia with Nathaniel Greene and fought at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse during the Revolution. And years later, right after those onerous laws were put on free people of color and after the Nat Turner Rebellion, John and his brothers no doubt had heard stories of the Quaker community of Guilford County. And they moved down here together and settled. And they bought a big chunk of land near the famous battlefield. And some of the descendants still live there today. Now, according to this article, John was possibly a full-blooded Indian. Personally, I think his grandmother was an Irish indentured servant, and that is how the family came to be free and mixed race and carry the Dungee Irish name. But once he got to Guilford County, John married a local woman named Jane, and she was recorded as an octoroon, meaning he had one Black great-grandparent and 7 white great-grandparents. So John and Jane had just one son, William Dungee, who spent his whole life in Greensboro. And so as a result of that, there are plenty of records to track him over his lifetime. Now you can see on this slide that his race was recorded every which way: mulatto, Black, mixed Indian, white, Negro, white, and Negro. And I drew a line just above the 1930 census, because that was the year the US Census stopped recording mixed races and Native Americans and shoved everybody into a binary system of white or colored. That system was based on the rule I mentioned earlier called the one-drop. And these laws were passed at state level throughout the decades of 1910 up to 1930. North Carolina passed its version in 1923. So William Dungee would no longer be considered mixed race or white, but only Negro, as they put it down, even though it's supposed to be white or colored. And then it stayed consistent. And that can be kind of confusing when you look like this. So this is William Dungee of Greensboro, North Carolina. And so these laws, an interesting thing that you see happening after 1920s and 30 is stricter enforcement of interracial relationships and marriage against that, right? So this meant that families who were light-skinned mulatto became darker over the generations. And you can see that in an example of a photo of William's great-granddaughter. Some of you might recognize her. She is none other than Josephine Boyd, the first Black student to enroll at Greensboro Senior High School in 1957 after the Brown versus Board decision led to school desegregation. To me, the Dungee family is like a perfect microcosm of American history, all rolled into one. Native American, freed people of color, soldiers in the American Revolution, and dedicated activists of the civil rights movement. Because Josephine was there because of her mother, Cora, who was very involved with the Greensboro NAACP. All right, I'm going to move out of the state for a minute and look at some repercussions to having these state and federal laws imposed that changed how America was regarded in regards to race. This is from the state of Arkansas. They passed their version of the one-drop rule very early, back in 1911. And it made it a felony to marry or live together, or even to bear a biracial child. Right? Just incredible stuff. The case that occurred in Arkansas from this had to do with three white children, siblings, who were expelled from public school. Why? Because it was known that they had a great grandmother who was Cherokee Indian. The children were therefore deemed to be Black because all other options were removed by law. So while the law's main purpose was to prevent sex across the color line, one of its major court cases dealt with segregated schools. And another repercussion we can see with this case is the erasure of Native Americans. So it was in 1930 that this practice, which had been operating state by state, was then implemented at a federal level. The Census Bureau stopped using the classification of mulatto, and that was due to intense lobbying by certain Southerners. So all those generations of free people of color and other mixed race people faded away as the new system demanded that all be classified as only Black or white. Chief among those Southern lobbyists was Walter Plecker, who just gets my blood pressure up just thinking about him. Here he is. Oh, wait, that's our old friend William Dungy of Greensboro, isn't it? You know, the mixed race, white, Negro, Indian guy you just met. I got him a little mixed up with Walter Plecker, whom he kind of resembles. Well, Walter Plecker was the registrar for Virginia's Bureau of Vital Statistics from its founding in 1912 and for the next 34 years. He was an avowed white supremacist, and he was responsible for Virginia's Racial Integrity Act of 1924, upon which so much is built. So not only did this cause people to have to choose between being white or Black going forward, but he actually ordered state agencies to reclassify certain families to being colored who were partly or even fully Native American. Think about that. They went in and altered past and current records. The effect of this meant that members of Virginia tribes could not get federal recognition because the families could no longer prove their cultural continuity as Indians. And you know when they finally got that federal recognition? 2018. So once again, we can see how this rule meant that many people of mixed heritage were seen only as African American with their more diverse ancestors erased. And that makes it difficult to accurately trace one's ancestry today. But thanks to the many advances in technology we have today, more people than ever are tracing their ancestry and heritage and history than ever before. And thanks to a wider availability of records and genetic testing and matching services, people are discovering or rediscovering the fuller story of who they are and where they came from. Now, a number of sociologists have studied the interaction of Black, white, and mixed race people who find each other through family history research or a shared DNA match. That's a whole other topic unto itself, but I just want to point out a couple of details. It reveals many forms of keeping secrets by the white members who don't want to acknowledge that their ancestors held slaves, let alone had sexual relations with them, but also by some Black members whose ancestors deliberately hid that knowledge. I'll give you an example from a woman in the study. She said, a lot of times African Americans don't want to accept the fact that there were all kinds of relations going on. Now you find out your grandmother, your great grandfather may have had some European blood. This can dredge up a lot of painful emotions, and people may recognize that their grandparents just wanted to move on with a new life and not talk about the trauma of the family tree. There are also many examples of white folks choosing denial in the face of all the evidence. And that can take a toll on a person psychologically. Let's go back to the Jefferson-Hemings saga for a minute so I can share what happened when the records and the DNA started to bring the true story to light. Or better said, when the records and the DNA matched up with the Hemings family long-held knowledge of their family's roots. Throughout the 20th century, the keepers of the flame for all things Jefferson and Monticello refused to acknowledge the oral histories of his mixed-race descendants. They were pushed aside to protect Jefferson's reputation. When later confronted with some kind of evidence, the pushback ran the gamut of the kind that you see in what's known as the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Now I'm going to give you a couple of examples. My favorite here is how Peter Carr, a close nephew of Jefferson's, was considered by defenders to be the man who had that long-time relationship with Sally and fathered her 6 children. But after those first DNA tests were performed way back in 1998, they showed no connection to any of the Carr descendants. So what did the defenders do? Pivot. Suddenly, they claimed that it was Randolph Jefferson, Thomas's younger brother, who was the father, even though absolutely nothing in the historic record lent itself to this theory, which is why it hadn't been used before. But without better matches due to the lack of male children, the DNA allowed at least for the possibility of Randolph Jefferson, so why not? 3 years later, in 2001, the Scholars Commission released a 500-page report on the Hemings affair. And the reactions from defenders in that report ranged from serious skepticism to a conviction that the allegations about Jefferson were almost certainly false, and that these so-called scholars were engaged in politically correct revisionism. They doubled down and they refused to acknowledge the scholarship, the science, and the word of Black people, no matter how light-skinned and related. But hey, we're getting there. It only took 20 years after that first DNA test for historians to now more readily acknowledge what Annette Gordon Reed wrote in 2008 about the Jefferson-Hemings relationship. But you know what? It took a whopping 76 years to even acknowledge that Sally Hemings lived at Monticello and that her room was just steps away from his in the South Wing. This is from the Washington Post. They're going to tear out the men's restroom that they had put in back in 1941. They turned her space into a men's bathroom. And so over time, they had erased all physical evidence of her presence at the home. So there was no mention of Sally and her children on the tours or in the books, and moreover, there's no physical evidence at the place. So we finally get to move forward. 1998, the DNA comes out, and some historians are like, okay, maybe we'll have to consider reviewing and revising our texts. And now, and these are all from Washington Post articles on this affair, historians now believe the third president was the father of her 6 children. It's a long slog to get there. All right, so I want to wrap this up on a more positive and encouraging note. I'd like to tell you about a national group called Coming to the Table. It was founded in 2006 by a group of descendants of enslaved and enslaver, and that includes DNA matched descendants of Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson. It's a nationwide network of groups that meets regularly for truth-telling, building relationships, healing, and taking action to dismantle inequitable systems and structures based on race. One of the core working groups that I participate in is called Linked Descendants. And it provides a facilitated space for people who are related through ownership, kinship, or violence. I have witnessed many interactions there between people from all walks who are seeking answers to learn the truth of who they are and where they came from, be they white, Black, or every shade of gray imaginable. And what is usually started as a way to seek answers over time leads to forming connections, to building bonds that help heal wounds and division. And while this is not part of my own heritage or family history, simply bearing witness to the truth telling and the healing can be a profound and emotional experience. And I have to add, because this just came in last night, I connected the descendants of Evelina Moore from Edward Moore and a descendant of the white wife. And they just had a Zoom together the other night, and they have just now connected for the first time. So this is just real, ongoing, very, very important work that's happening. All right, to recap, I provided you 5 examples of mixed race families in Virginia and North Carolina, the famous in the form of Jefferson and Hemings, the locally prominent with the Atkins, and the ordinary through Edward Moore, William Henry Stevens, and William Dungy of Greensboro. I talked about some of the laws and attitudes that bound people in the 1800s, such as restricting the movement of free people of color and later requiring them to leave the state. And then on to the very strict anti-miscegenation laws in the 1900s that made it a crime to marry, live with, have sex with, or have a child by anyone of the opposite race. And how these strict laws literally erased the mixed race heritage of millions of Americans and also impacted American Indians. I touched on the growing role of family research and genetic genealogy to finally uncover the long hidden truth so we can tell a richer and more accurate story, while at the same time recognizing that mixed race descendants sometimes knew their family stories, but were deliberately ignored. And I ended with a recommendation that you explore the many offerings at Coming to the Table if you want to know more about the great efforts to bring people together to better understand our shared history and sometimes shared bloodlines with a goal to healing division and wounds. So I thank you all for your time and attention and interest. And hopefully if we can go just a little bit longer due to those tech difficulties, I would love to have some questions and answer time and discussion.
Thank you so much, Karen. If you could, Karen, could you put the website link for coming to the table and to the chat. I wanted to let everybody know I did put a link in the chat to images of the descendants of or an image of a descendant of Thomas Jefferson. That link will take you there. I think it's just a better understanding of how connected we actually are in this country, and kind of disrupt that binary mindset in regards to race. And this is specifically about one thing or another. There's so much gray. That was why the title of the show is what it is, because there is so much gray. I wanted to quickly give breath and consideration again to what um, may have been taking place in more abundance in the eras that preceded where Karen covered. And I had mentioned before we began the show, Karen and I were discussing, I wanted to highlight the life of a woman named Celia, who was in Missouri, and in like 1855, she had been the enslaved woman being owned by an enslaver who took sexual liberties with her. His name was John Newsom. She had 2 children by Newsom. So think about that in terms of how life continues despite its origin. And Celia had become enamored and engaged in a relationship with a free Black man named George. And Newsom did not like that. And George did not like that Newsom had sexual relations with Celia. So at point in June 23rd, 1855, she actually reacted to one of Newsom's attempts at having sexual relations with her, and she killed Newsom. And although in our current time and mindset, we think of that as self-defense and she was justified, that was not the case. She was a piece of property. And because of that, because of her position, because of all of the laws and things that have been covered by Ms. Skelton today, she was not allowed to have defended herself from his assault, and she forfeited her life. She was hanged as a consequence. So things did occur that were not okay. And we're not here, again, to romanticize any of these relationships, but we do acknowledge as human beings that life is complex, and survival being key to all of this. I was also thought of, I'm guessing maybe most of you have seen the movie 12 Years a Slave. When I teach my resistance course, I actually utilize Solomon Northrop's book, 12 Years a Slave. It's based on his actual experience of being enslaved, being kidnapped into slavery. In the film, you guys might recall a scene where Alfred Woodard's character is involved in a relationship with a white man in the South, and she's living a better life than some of the other enslaved people around her. Connect in your mind as we get ready to have a couple questions, I hope. There's life taking place, and survival is key. And it is not a villainous thing to prioritize your comfort. It is not a villainous thing to unpack the ideas around how your position can be improved. If you guys remember the scene, Lupita Nyong'o, she wanted some soap. And this Black woman who was living a better life because of her relationship with a white man was able to provide her with some soap. These things are so complex. That's a minimal comment. I'm trying to get to the point where you guys can engage some. So I just want to make it understood. Binary thinking about these matters, it doesn't get us very far. Think about this in a more complex way. Humanity is key and core to everything we're talking about here. So with that being said, are there any questions? Anybody want to type something in the chat? That's fine. Or if you want to unmic and say a few things, that is fine as well.
Hey, I was thinking in the context of what's going on in the country now with Vice President Harris now running for office, and the complexities of her makeup, right? I mean, she's a multiracial woman married to a Caucasian man, and just how that works in their household, how that works in society, how that works in this race. We'll be talking about this. Unfortunately, her opposition will be talking about it in a way that is going to be toxic and damaging to our country. But I think in light of what we discussed today, it's very important that we understand how all these things can be unifiers, bring us together and help us to really unite around her and really move things down the road the way they need to be because of the history of this country, how we all come to this place together. She's a perfect example of the history, regardless of the things that we discuss today that are horrible, but also the beauty of what it looks like. So that's all I had.
You have to join Grown Folks Business Tonight, Demetrius. That is exactly what we'll be talking about. Some of this musical chairs that's taking place. And not to push back, but to be clear, she has more of an immigrant experience than she does anything attached to America's legacy and all of that stuff. But something I did connect, Karen, with what we have talked about as far as the law. You all have to really take in and process how today, how the loss of women's rights in regards to their body and abortion rights, abortion access, has been infringed upon. Something that seemingly was normal, seemingly was accepted, seemingly was fixed, can be taken away. So think about during the era that Karen's just covered, where people are thinking, I'm mixed, and that's the thing that I circle on the census, or I highlight my Native American heritage, and how that can be taken away with law. So this is a country of laws, but some things that we think are settled are not. And right now we're seeing that in real time as well. But yeah, anybody else have anything they wanted to throw out there?
Thank you so much for that presentation, Karen. It was enlightening and allowed me to see some things that really happened closer to home, even, from Greensboro to Winston and even further. So I thank you. This is my first time joining, but I am most certainly looking forward to more encounters and hopefully more presentations. I think that is great and it's timely. So thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah,
Tango?
I just appreciate the information, Karen. I'm kind of stuck on the families of color, Black families for me, who knew the history, but have chosen not to explore, embrace. And I do think a lot of that is due to trauma. I personally have a very difficult time accepting my last name because of how it's rooted in whiteness and how it was very much that family did not accept, my mulatto great grandfather. And I don't know everything that happened around that because it was not talked about. But thanks for the information.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's helpful when you get ideas, when you see patterns, and then I have people who say, yeah, that's my lived experience. The more that happens, the more confident and comfortable I can feel at putting this out here. But I've talked to a lot of folks who are primarily from Washington, D.C. up to New York and Pennsylvania. And every one of them that I have worked with has said, I just don't know anything about my own Black roots because grandma would say, know your business. No, not talking about it. Go outside. We're not talking about it. And only as adults that they could come to look at that and say, maybe it was too painful for her to talk about it back in 1970 because she was going back to the 1930s and knows what happens to her grandparents and so forth. So yeah, it's a real issue, and I just cannot say enough about the good work at coming to the table, at helping people navigate that and work through it.
Yeah, that's a great observation. I'm same here, Tango. There are family members who do not like to discuss the fact, and I'm aware, through the murmurings that a great aunt of mine was actually assaulted in some way. Her child came out very fair skinned, and that was often the rumor, you know, that this white guy had taken advantage of her, and nobody wanted to talk about it. So there's trauma, there's pain, there's a lot of things mixed into these experiences that do disrupt a clear telling. But as Karen communicated with what some of the white women, these wives were having to acknowledge, even if it was begrudgingly, that their husbands were having children with these enslaved women. And there are records that dictate how awful some of those women treated those enslaved women, knowing that the enslaved woman had no choice as to whether she had relations with that man or not. It's a it's a tangled web. So I'm grateful for Karen being able to give us a couple of strands to take a look at a little closer. But we understand there's a lot more complexity involved. There's a lot more places we could go with these stories and how everything connects. And I just wanted to say, Karen did something for me because she's awesome at what she does. She found, you know, some information about my great grandfather, who I did know, I got to meet, but he was a veteran of World War One. And she found some stuff. I found a little bit, but she found a lot, and she found it fast. So Karen is very much efficient at what she does, and I'm glad that she was able to make time for us today. Ricky, you had something you wanted to add?
Yes, thanks, Felton. Karen, what kind of issues did you run into when you were gathering this information, and how long did it take for you to get it?
So as you saw, there were 5 different families that I used examples from, and all of that has been in about the past 18 months, coming from different cases. I tried not to bring anything to the current time, right, to protect privacy of folks. Images that I used, I made sure to take that were out of copyright or also acknowledging the source of them. The picture of Fannie Mae Richards example, she's in the Encyclopedia of Michigan State History, right? You can find stuff like that. So not sure how to answer. It's I do it 7 days a week. I do what I love, and I love what I do, and I can't get enough of it. So I just do this all the time. And you know, it's like you stay in the flow. You know, if I were composing music, I'd be at the piano every day, making up new songs and fixing old ones and practicing. This is my piano. So there are obstacles, to be sure. Not the biggest myth of all is everything's digitized these days. Haha, haha. No, there's a fraction. It's huge. We can do a lot with it. There's so much that is not. And I have a list of things I want to go to the Library of Virginia in Richmond and do in person at the archives. But the good news is, regarding African American history and access to records, that's bumped up now and has become a priority. So things that were behind paywall are removed. Ancestry.com, for example, will allow you to actually see Freedmen's Bureau records without a subscription. Library of Virginia has a whole section on recapturing the history, and they've put all of that first. That's where their budget is going. I've talked with the folks who are digitizing these records, and they come in the form of deeds, right? Wills, probate, all those court cases. Because why? People were property. So they were transferred through a will. They were transferred as a deed of sale. In also, and this has been a tough one, to see the number of times they were used as collateral for a mortgage to get a loan. They were using the value, their most valuable property, as collateral to go and buy more property, whether that be farmland or more slaves. So that's, I'd say, probably my biggest obstacle is this psychological obstacle of having to remember. You can't just open the book of the founding families of Virginia and find a nice little pedigree of your Watsons or Turners. You have to go into property records to go find your ancestors. And that's tough.
Okay, thank you. You did such a fantastic job. I can see this is your passion. So it's not a job for you.
Right, absolutely. It's a ministry. I give it away more than anything. I have some clients that have hired me who are white folks who say, I can't undo what happened in the past, but starting today, I want to be the good ancestor. What can I do to bring my family's personally held records to the table and get them in the hands of the people that it impacted, and to provide healing and personal reparations, whatever that looks like. Now, I'll tell you what, one of those reparations is bringing home the ancestors, giving people their family back. And that's powerful. So I do that, and then I do a whole lot of pro bono case for African Americans because you know what, this stuff is hard. And I've been doing this for 15 years and then switched to specifically reparative work only in the past 2 years living here in Greensboro. And it takes a lot of training, professional development, lots of coursework to be able to get to this point that I can go in and do what I did for Felton in 2 days' time. So a lot of the work that I do is completely pro bono. I just call this my ministry.
Thank you so much.
Hey, Karen, this is Rob. Yeah, hey, Karen, if you had to do research in Rockingham County, say for a former slaveholder and his descendants and slaves' descendants going forward, what is your go-to place to find that information? Specifically for Rockingham County.
Yeah, I would go to familysearch.org. And familysearch.org is free. It is not a subscription-based genealogy site. And what they have there that is better than anybody, hands down, is wikis. And you go into a map on the front page and you click on your state, North Carolina, and then you click on the county, Rockingham, and up pops a list of records of what's held where, what years do they cover? Was the courthouse burned and they lost records? And if so, what years did that impact? And so you can go in there and find out, where are the church records? Are they held locally or at a diocese? Are there school records? Are there plantation records? They're amazing. And so I encourage people who are looking to go do some learning first before going to Ancestry and trying to type in the name of a guy and thinking that all your stuff's going to pop up. That ain't going to happen. So that's my best recommendation, the geographical based wiki guides at Family Search.
Thank you very much.
Oh, unless the, one second. Unless the name is Hairston. The Hairston name is ubiquitous across this region. One of the largest slaveholding families in the area, from Danville and Martinsville down across these top counties, border counties of North Carolina. And let me say real quick a thing about names. So surnames is my passion, trying to find out, where did people get their names from? Did they get to choose? I'll tell you what, I am amazed. More freed people chose their own last name than took it from a slave owner. So I'm here to tell you, do not assume that your surname is the same of a slave owner. More often than not, that was not the case. Okay. Now, having said that, I'm going to contradict it with Hairston. They had so many people over a very long time, and they had no other interaction with folks, and they didn't have any other last names. So there were hundreds and hundreds of people freed in 1865 who took the name Hairston because they had nothing else to use. So the name is ubiquitous, and that's why this book is also called An American Family in Black and White. And you'll notice you probably know more Hairstons around here who are Black because the white families were small. A lot of them moved away, and the enslaved members stayed and their descendants stayed. So if you've got any connection to Hairston, there's a lot of other places I could send you to directly.
Yeah, just real quick, the name selection, sometimes it was based on, in that case, it sounds how established the people were. You didn't necessarily just because you came free didn't mean you want to disconnect from what that name might get you. It might afford you some status in society. So again, just you have to think this stuff is very complicated. It's not always cut and dry. And you had people taking the name Washington. Washington was a popular name that Black people took. That was the founder of the country. It showed that you had some connection, real or not, to one of the founders of America. So there's a lot of complexity involved in this. I wanted to bring into the equation a lady I met at the Southern Historical Society. Her name is Juliana Perone. She's at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and she's working with records, historical records is from courthouses, from wills, but all about property ownership, but also how some slave owners left their enslaved people property and things that were meaningful because they understood they needed something to survive with after the slave owner was no longer with us. So her work at that presentation was called Rehearsals for Reparations, because there is a knowledge and acknowledging by some that there were interactions with their so-called property that were connected to an understanding that they had to have something to survive on. So that is an acknowledgement that there was a need for these people to be sustained and taken care, be able to take care of themselves, whether it was property, whether it was actual money, farm, land, whatever the case was. That understanding lends itself to what Karen was highlighting a moment ago, reparations, repair. There's nothing wrong with that word, guys. We got to detach from this. When we say reparations, we got to whisper it. No, reparations is something that should be normalized, especially where Black Americans are considered. Especially, there was reparations paid to Jews who endured the Holocaust. There was reparations paid to Japanese who were interned in World War II, in American prisons that they just built to house Japanese people who they thought may be connected to the actions of the country of Japan. Let's just get away from some of these things that we've kind of encoded upon ourselves and have real robust conversations like this one today. And we'll be better.
That's awesome.
We'll be better for it. Yeah, we'll be better for it. Anybody else had anything you want to say before we have to get out of here?
Yeah, this is Lisa, really
Go ahead,
quick.
Lisa.
My uncle was visiting here from Savannah over the weekend, and this is his home. And he went to the cemetery where his mother, my grandmother, is proposed to be buried, yet the cemetery is kind of divided, and it's actually at Guilford College Road. So how, if you know, because it seems to be outside your subject matter expertise, but how can you find out how to research that type of thing? Because I know that there's a movement around the excavation and the ceremoniously, funeralizing or reburying people after highways and buildings and things have been put over a lot of the African American population here in America.
I'm so glad you asked that, because that actually is something that I'm involved with. And I was going to tag off to what Skelton just said and give an example of that, so that you asked it. I'm going to guess, was that Plum Methodist?
It's actually Raleigh Crossroads. So Raleigh Crossroads Methodist Church is across the street, but the cemetery is on the western side of Guilford College, and obviously Guilford College runs through there. But he, as a child, recalled that there weren't those businesses there when his mother, my grandmother, passed away, and a lot of our ancestors are there, but you can't find them and things like that. So I imagine it's similar to what's happening in other parts of the country, where they were just, you know, roads and things were buried, built across the graves of African Americans here, but I don't know where to even start for that particular project.
Yeah, start locally, look for groups that are involved in that. There are also statewide groups that do like preserving slave cabins. There are very few left. And when they find them, they do all they can to analyze them and then preserve them. And so there are groups doing things like that for cemeteries. Often it involves finding the white property owners from back in the day, right? To be able to find records where it says, Dinah was buried up on the cove. And so you get to figure out where people were buried through those records. So it is tricky. It can be done. And I want to give you an example of it because, I'm very, very passionate about the cemeteries. When I learned by living in Alexandria, Virginia, about the Black cemeteries that had been bulldozed and paved over, that was a part of that, what lit my fire with all this work, the imbalance and injustice. When you go to Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond and you've got all these crypts and obelisks and vaults and granite and marble, and then you go to the Black cemetery, if you can even find it, and you've got impressions, indentions in the ground, some field stones. I look at that every time and I say, God, unequal, separate and unequal, even unto death. And that's what fires me up and motivates me. So I'm here to tell you, I won't take too long, but I'm working with a group in Caroline County, Virginia, and I'm using the records, they're using family history. We're putting a bunch of stuff together to find out where everybody was buried and mark that area, identify it and preserve it, and get that uploaded to Find a Grave so others can find it in future, and put up signage. And so it's coming along really well. We've been working this for about 9 months. And in April, I went up there and we had a canine cadaver group that came out, believe it or not, sniffer dogs who could determine there were remains that far back, that the area had been used up till about the 1920s. Blew my mind. So that was the first thing. Now that we've got that report in hand, our next step is to work with ground penetrating radar. And there are groups that will do this voluntarily as a means of service. And so that is in the works right now to get a group to come out and get a closer sense of how many are there. I've gone into the records and I can find stuff through diaries, letters, ledgers of people who died during slavery, and I'm building out the picture of that. So we can say, yes, we know that Caroline was there, that William was there, and their child, Kenny, was there. So starting locally, we can talk if you want, and I can help put you in touch maybe with some folks that are doing that around here. But yeah, that's a big passion of mine. And I also was very active with the Guilford County Community Remembrance Project, which was to acknowledge the lynching of Eugene Hairston, right? Hairston. And there's big brass plaque in the Kernersville Cemetery, St. Paul's, where he's presumed to be buried and his family members very definitely are. People still say presumed because, well, we don't have a record. Well, you're not going to have a record. Get over that. But culturally, historically, the whole family's there. It was right next door to the church itself. He's in there, right? And so there's now signage to acknowledge what had happened to him and that he is buried there. So it's a work in progress.
Karen, I want to say thank you, and you've gotten some thank yous from everyone, and I don't know if this thing is going to cut off at 1:30 or not, so I wanted to, that's right on time. Lisa, I can connect you and Karen, and I just want to, again, grateful to be able to do this, and you've gotten some thank yous in the chat as well. listen, it's recorded. I'll send it back out as you guys know. I think it's worthy. In 2 weeks, Demetrius Ponder, who is on the call, you got to meet. He's going to be doing a lunchtime chat on economic disparity. And you see, we already touching on it, that we're talking about reparations here. All of that is mixed in together. So again, thank you all for being here. And again, thank you, Karen, for what you've contributed to RELC today. You all have a wonderful rest of your day. And Demetrius, check your email. I sent you something. Y'all take care. Have a good one. Thank you,
Bye.
Karen.
Have a great day.
Yeah, good day, everyone.